The lingering fuel crisis in parts of the country has left many Nigerians struggling to survive.
Indeed, the scarcity experienced during the festivities forced many Nigerians to wonder why an oil-producing nation like Nigeria is still troubled by a fuel crisis almost yearly. Well, the Senate also summoned the Minister of State for Petroleum, Ibe Kachuku, and the Group Managing Director of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, Mekati Baru, to explain reasons for the fuel scarcity. Our senior correspondent Femi Akonde monitored the public hearing from our studio.
Managing Director of the Nigerian National Petroleum Corporation, Mekati Baru, came under intense fire at the Senate public hearing on fuel scarcity. At the beginning of the fuel scarcity, NNPC and the federal government blamed marketers for the petrol shortage. But marketers and other stakeholders in the oil and gas industry laid the facts bare at the public hearing, and it was clear that NNPC was responsible for the gap in supply.
The main issue is supply shortage. It is no more, no less.
In the recent past, the Department of Petroleum Resources has embarked on monitoring and sealing up of petrol stations found to be dispensing product above the pump price. But as it was revealed at the public hearing, this is an exercise in futility.
If DPR can go and block or close a filling station outlet, I think they are leaving a donkey that is not moving. The DPR refused to touch the donkey and begin to beat the lot of the donkey. Why can't you trace filling station A? You have this product and you are selling it 145 naira, above 145. Where do you get this product?
The Minister of State for Petroleum admits that there is a shortfall in supply and that the NNPC is faced with the logistic constraints to do more than 100% supply. This could mean allowing marketers to import again.
But just not taking away from the issue, our point is, whether we establish a 20 or is it 25 or is it 23, there is a gap. Now, we need to therefore say, how do we deal with that gap? There are three mechanisms that we're looking at in dealing with that gap. One, because my position is likely that whatever we do, given the logistics constraints of NNPC to do 100% supply and the overarching burden on the institution, we need to free the marketers to do their business. To do that business, you've got to address the pricing issue.
The man in the center of the storm, Mekati Baru, gave a strong assurance that the NNPC will ensure that the queues at filling stations disappear in the shortest possible time.
I'm reassuring Nigerians that we will clear queues everywhere in this country.
The public hearing may have unraveled the issues troubling the petroleum downstream sector. But what Nigerians want is the availability of premium motor spirit and an end to the hardship caused by its scarcity. Femi Akonde, TVC News, Lagos.
All right, that's the background to our discussion right now. We have joining us the Executive Director of Journalists for Democratic Rights, Adewale Adeoye. Good morning. It's nice to see you.
Good morning.
Thank you for joining us.
Right. The blame game, as usual, went on. Is NNPC that's responsible? No, it's marketers and all of that. But it seems obvious now. But Nigerians expect heads to roll at the end of the day because we should have gotten past this level of things. But that doesn't seem to be so now.
Well, in reality, the Nigerian political economy is built around oil. So whatever happens in that sector, we affect the Nigerian economy, the livelihood of Nigerians in a very fundamental way. So it should be our interest to ensure that whatever conflict or contradiction we have in the oil sector, those contradictions must be resolved once and for all. But unfortunately, since 1977, when the NNPC was created, it has been one problem over the other, And what we are seeing at the Senate is more or less like the ritual, the drama, which has continued since 1999 that Nigeria, returned to democratic rule. I don't think the Senate should not forget that they have to go beyond drama and take fundamental measures that we're able to resolve these problems headlong. And I think we understand the problems, even though we keep on pretending. There's a lot of corruption going on in the NNPC. There is a lot of, lack of capacity, of the NNPC to actually resolve the problem. And of course, lack of political will on the part of successive authorities from 1999 to date. If we look back, what is going on now is not new. In 2011, the Senate probed the NNPC, because there was about 931 billion that, was not actually well accounted for. In 2011, we had perhaps what I could consider as one of the best attempts, because there was a committee that was set up led by retired Justice Alpha Begore. And in that committee, we had the Labour, we had the NURTW, we had NUPENG, we had civil society, we even had the NUJ. Everybody was looking up to, a productive report that will be able to address these problems. That committee came up with a report. Till today, it has been thrown into the trash bin. In 2012, the Senate also raised issue concerning corruption, in the NNPC. And don't forget that in 2011, there was forensic audit by KPMG, that revealed a lot of malpractices, a lot of sharp practices, over reductions, amounted to about 28 billion naira, of funds that belong to states, So these things have been going on and on and on. We understand the problem.
Even just recently, 50 billion naira was discovered in an NNPC secret account. So we can really go on and on with all this. March
last year, the Senate Committee on the Downstream discovered that about 5.7 trillion naira could not be justified by the NNPC, in terms of subsidies, deductions and all sort of things. And these things have been on and on and on.
Okay.
Yes,
let me come in here, really, talking about subsidy. And Nigerians were shocked, really, a few weeks ago when they heard that they are still paying marketers about 26 naira as a differential subsidy, because the landing cost is about 171 naira. After the president hinted while he was outside Nigeria that they were no longer paying subsidy. Vice President Oshibajo also said that as well, that they were no longer paying subsidy. And then we later heard that it wasn't even the federal government that was paying it, that it was the NNPC, a government parastatal, paying it.
So it tells you that, we are just rigmaroling. We are failed to deal with the, we are failed to deal with the substance. We are only dealing with the shadow, because even when subsidies were removed in the past years, what happened to the money that was saved? The federal government last year announced that they saved 184 billion naira from subsidy removal. And between 2006 and 2008, they saved 800 billion naira. That amount of money is enough to set up a mini refinery for the country. So for me, I think is a game that the NNPC has become a kind of cartel, and people flourish from this cartel. People's livelihood. So there are some people, a rogue cell, whose livelihood thrives on the scam and rot in NNPC, and that is why it's a collaboration between the political class and an economic group of people that work together to ensure that they keep the status quo the way it is, so that the fundamental problems will not be resolved to the detriment of Nigerian people.
All right, the Senate certainly is an institution within the country that has the powers to look into anything as far as oversight is concerned, with the aim of solving these problems. But we have seen lots and lots of probes, inquiries from the National Assembly, rather, but Nigerians don't seem to expect so much when they hear that the National Assembly is carrying out a probe of this or probe of that. They've called the Minister of State for Petroleum and the GMD of NNPC to answer questions. But what are Nigerians really expecting this time? What's going to be different?
Well, I think there is a very strong and justifiable suspicion based on empirical evidence that the NNPC, perhaps funds, is a reserve bank that actually funds some political interests. If not, and there's a suspicion that the Senate itself and the major characters in the Senate may not actually be, they could not be, trustworthy in terms of their involvement. Maybe they are also not impartial in terms of their involvement in some of these issues we are talking about. There have been so many probes that the Senate have carried out in the past, but eventually nothing happens. And people are beginning to think that this attempt of organizing every time you call it is just a kind of an attempt to reinforce the illusion that the Senate is committed to transparency in governance. Whereas in the reality, in terms of reality, the Senate is not actually interested in tackling that problem headlong by taking the bull by the horn to ensure that these constant problems, this recurring decimal of fuel crisis is resolved once and for all. So I think there is a lot of suspicion that the Senate hasn't got the capacity to deal decisively with this.
It brings to mind the member Lawan of the National Assembly then, a few years ago, that was accused of even asking for a bribe.
Oh yeah, so many other cases like that that involve people that are in the National Assembly. And that's why we are thinking that there are statutory organizations like the FCC that should have come into this matter, and ensure that justice is done. Because the NNPC has about 7 subsidiary organizations, and it's been on for 41 years. And it's one problem over. I'm not aware of anybody that has been jailed relating to crime committed in the NNPC. So there's a whole lot of problems, and we really need to move forward, to move from the past and deal with these problems, so that we can create a kind of paradigm shift, from tradition
in all of this. The president remains the Minister of Petroleum, and one of his reasons, or the understanding Nigerians have or had when he said he wants to be Minister of, just to keep an eye, is to ensure that there's sanity, relative sanity in the oil industry. Has there been any justification for the president to be Minister of Petroleum?
Well, I don't think the president needs to take that portfolio. They actually took some 40 years ago. I think he should hands off that portfolio so that he will not eat more than he can chew. We all know that the president has a lot of responsibilities. Combining such a very strategic portfolio with his routine work, I think, as the president. So I think it is time for the president to hands off that ministry and give it to another person that is more competent. But that does not actually mean that handing it over will automatically lead to a resolution of the contradictions. But at least that because you remember what the group managing director said, that on many occasions they wanted to see the president. It becomes very difficult because of so many schedules. So if the president can hands off that portfolio, give it to another person, perhaps it's going to be a little bit step forward.
And whenever asked, why did you do this, GMD Mekanti Baru would say, the president asked me to, the president asked me to. That blanket power to do whatever, so long you have the backing of the president. Now, do you think the unbundling of the NNPC would work? Motions towards it, the FG moved, even the Senate just last year approved it, but it seems we are not hearing a lot about it anymore as we're supposed to.
Yeah, it's quite unfortunate because at the inception of this administration, there was a lot of goodwill because of the experience of, the president, a former head of state who was also petroleum minister, but down the line, halfway into the game, I think a lot of Nigerians are disappointed that the president has not shown enough political will. And there is no indication that in the next 2 years, when we are now entering the season of elections, that the president would like to preoccupy himself with dealing with the NNPC.
It's less than 2 years
now.
So,
I mean, we can conveniently say that the president has not lived up to public expectation in terms of dealing with the problems in NNPC.
Yeah. Now, in the report we played earlier on, some persons were saying, well, the DPR is seen as being a little active, here and there, going to filling stations and then trying to ensure that no one sells above the pump price. But someone said in that report, one of the marketers said, there's a reason. If anybody is selling above pump price, there's a reason why that is happening. Sure. And the right question should be, where did you get your fuel, and how at what rate or what cost did you buy it, and all of isn't that where DPR should really start from as a body of regulator? Well,
the DPR has a lot of constraints, and I think most of those constraints are political. It's an arm of the NNPC. There are limitations because there are a lot of political interest, that will come in when when the organization wants to carry out its functions, that will ensure that things are not done in the right way. So, and I think the NNPC is tied to the upon spring of very strong political interest. And until the NNPC becomes independent, like you have in other countries like Brazil, Venezuela, and it is run as a really independent organization that is not under the control, the hegemonic control of the state. We are really going to, we will not be able to resolve the problems that we have been having for 4 decades. It's really a shame that no government has been able to tackle this problem decisively.
And then looking at the promise NNPC made to Nigerians, really, from what you just said, trying to build on it, that yes, this scarcity is still here and it's been on for many weeks now. Many would expect that the NNPC at this time should be talking about progress made in turning around the states of the refineries, as promised that from January, some of these refineries will start churning out refined crude.
I don't think there's any hope that Nigerian refineries, will work. As long as a very strong cartel benefits from the oil subsidy scam, and as long as political interests, are involved in oil importation, they will ensure that Nigerian refineries, will not work. So it's a kind of, it's a very complex game. And I think that is why the ball begins and ends on the table of the president. He needs to develop that, to show the political way that he really wants to tackle this problem. Because we can't just continue. I mean, we are an oil-producing country. There are so many countries that we give oil. We supply oil to them. Look at countries like Ghana. Why is it that every time it is only in Nigeria and the whole of West Africa that you have one fuel crisis or the other? Petroleum-producing countries all over the world, they don't have this kind of peculiar problems that is associated with Nigeria. And we are all affected by the global market. And of course, OPEC has reduced, oil production, which has chopped up the price. So it's an opportunity for us to readdress this problem because Nigeria is going to make a lot of savings, from
He's already making savings. Foreign reserve now hits $40 billion as the case may be. Now, there are countries that are not oil producing, and just like you said, they don't even have issues like we have. Now, the Dangote refineries, we've talked about it on this show so many times, almost every day we mention it. Is that really the game changer now by the time it comes upstream from 2019?
Well, I think it was a strategic intervention to have the private sector, to be involved in production, and distribution of oil. But I think it's too early to judge whether that would actually change, because I don't see how the future, the destiny of 170 million people will be tied to oil production by just an individual, not even a company.
But licenses were given for modular refineries at one point, but somehow some of those independent, those recipients of the certificates had to even turn them back because they said the environment wasn't going to be viable for them to function.
And I think the Dangote refineries cannot produce enough for Nigeria. It's going to take a very long time. So we need to design a method. We need to design a strategy that we ensure that Nigerian refineries come back on stream. A lot of money have been spent on these refineries, and we are asking what happened to them. The money you save from subsidy running into trillions, what has happened to this money? And a lot of organizations set up, we are talking about the subsidy reinvestment and empowerment board that was led by a very credible person, Christopher Collins. What has happened to all those kind of projects that governments over and over put in place to address this problem? So it's a kind of, it's a problem that the government is not ready to resolve. And I think it's quite unfortunate because I personally had a lot of hope in President Buhari. And with what is going on now, that we have lost the game, it's more or less a hopeless situation unless there is an intervention in an unimaginable way.
In a very divine because Nigerians believe in divinity.
Exactly. And then looking at it really, we are told that those industry watchers will tell you that, let's just face it, some of these refineries are outdated. We point out the Kaduna refinery, and that in fact the amount spent to build the refineries and the one compared to the amount already spent for turnaround maintenance, close to or even more than if you sum the total since the days of former heads of state Babangida. So, like you said, you already said it's kind of sabotage. People are benefiting from the system, so they don't want it to work. So why not just maybe set up new refineries or open it up? Because is it really difficult to do? If you go to the Niger Delta, many were arrested for running illegal refineries in their backyards. So how difficult is it really? Should it be for the government of Nigeria to allow this to work? We got information months back last year that some of these people in the Niger Delta that were running these illegal refineries were going to be brought to the mainstream and be allowed to function. We are not hearing anything about that anymore as well.
Yeah. Well, you know, the government said between 2006 and 2008, it saved 800 billion naira. That is enough to start if the government is really serious about setting up a refinery. But then there is a question of ownership, you know, of oil. These oil resources belong to indigenous communities. It was the federal government that came with laws to appropriate them. And if we really want to practice federalism to its true letters, you know, the oil communities, the indigenous communities must have a stake in, in oil ownership, distribution, and production. So I see no reason why the federal government should continue to hold on, to oil, oil ventures. States that produce oil should also be major stakeholders because it's their resources. So
one would say 13% derivation is being paid to states.
That is not enough.
The NDDC is there meant for them as well. The Ministry of Niger Delta, all those are different benefits for
instance, take Lagos State, for instance. There is no reason why Lagos cannot own refinery. There is no reason why the Niger Delta states cannot set up their own refinery. So we should not be waiting for the government. So the sector should be liberalized. And I think that is one of the major ways that the government can actually show commitment. But as long as the government wants to control the whole structure of the NNPC, the whole oil production, distribution, and all that, there's really going to be a lot of problem. As we speak now, the marketers, in terms of distribution, controls 49%, and the NNPC 59%. But in terms of production and distribution, it is still the government that calls the shot. So the oil sector must be liberalized so that indigenous communities and oil-producing states should have a stake, and that is as a reflection of what federalism actually means. It's not as if we are doing something different. That is what is done in the US. So we need to unbundle the NNPC to be driven by the people so that this issue of a small cartel controlling the NNPC for their own parochial interests, will be put on.
So that Nigerians will benefit.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we remember the days of Oriental Refinery in Anambra State, and Dangote is coming upstream now, which means that there's some level of freedom for other players to come in. You just mentioned now that Niger Delta state governments can't even come up with refinery. So I think they have to start thinking about that. Because
things I think we
federal government cannot handle everything. It's becoming too obvious that they can't handle it.
The price of petroleum in Bayelsa should not necessarily be the same in Lagos or Sokoto, because oil is, Bayelsa is an oil producing, state. For instance, in Lagos, more people consume oil. So we really don't need to have a national price regime whereby the price of oil in Sokoto is the same with Zamfara and then in Lagos.
Exactly.
So we really need to liberalize.
Because when it comes to transporting oil from here to Maiduguri or to Kano or to, it's quite more expensive.
Exactly, I was about to say that because that's another major issue that we don't even talk about enough. Having tank farms just in one area, and then all tankers would have to come
from the country
to Lagos to come and get fuel.
And
who covers the cost of
when the tanker leaves Lagos,
transportation?
you know how many days, weeks before it gets to Sokoto. Now they are talking of railway, cargo railway, and all that. But that's a long-term, plan. So we need to also consider tank farms in some of these strategic states, because when you continue to rely on road as means of transportation of, and most of these trailers break down on the road. If you are going from here to Sokoto, probably it's going to take a trailer about 1 week. So I think all of them need to come to Lagos to come and fetch oil, and we allow this problem to linger on for so many years. It's quite very unfortunate.
All right, we have to leave you here now. Adewale Adeoye, Executive Director of Journalists for Democratic Rights. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for coming on the show. Thank you.
Right.